Sick. Let's learn how to influence people. Today we're talking about commitment. Commitment is the key. This is off the back of the section titled Commitment and Consistency. And I think what we talked about before we get into the actual words, to understand why consistency is so powerful a motive, is important to recognize that in most circumstances consistency is valued and adaptive. So writing off the back of the fact that consistency is valued by society and is adaptive, as in, well, let's see. Inconsistency is commonly thought to be an undesirable personality trait. The person whose beliefs, words, and deeds don't match may be seen as indecisive, confused, two-faced, or even mentally ill. Whoa. On the other side, a high degree of consistency is normally associated with personal and intellectual strength. It is at the heart of logic, rationality, stability, and honesty. But because it is so typically in our best interest to be consistent, we easily fall into the habit of being automatically so, even in situations when it is not the sensible way to be. When it occurs unthinkingly, consistency can be disastrous. Offers a shortcut through the density of modern life. This was the transcendental meditation one, which was basically people went to the seminar. There was a researcher, one of these researchers, who went and shot down all of their points and basically refuted the whole practice. But in spite of that, in spite of there being no response that was meaningful from the TM folks, a bunch of people still signed up because they had committed to the act and committed to getting the benefits from the stated benefits from the practice, even though it was shot down. And the idea was, if I don't commit now, I'm never going to do it. And they needed something to hold on to. The spokesman put it best: well, I wasn't going to put down any money tonight because I'm really quite broke. I was going to wait until the next meeting. But when your buddy started talking, I knew I'd better give them my money now, or I'd go home and start thinking about what he said and never sign up. Ooh, wow. Anyway, let's go to commitment is the key. Once we realize that the power of consistency is formidable in directing human action, an important practical question immediately arises. How is that force engaged? What produces the click that activates the whir of the powerful consistency tape? Social psychologists think they know the answer. Commitment. If I can get you to make a commitment, that is, to take a stand, to go on record, I will have set the stage for your automatic and ill-considered consistency with that earlier commitment. Once a stand is taken, there's a natural tendency to behave in ways that are stubbornly consistent with the stand. As we've already seen, social psychologists are not the only ones who understand the connection between commitment and consistency. Commitment strategies are aimed at us by compliance professionals of nearly every sort. Each of the strategies is intended to get us to take some action or make some statement that will trap us into later compliance through consistency pressures. Procedures designed to create commitment take various forms, and some are fairly straightforward, while others are among the most subtle compliance tactics we will encounter. First, for instance, suppose you wanted to increase the number of people in your area who would agree to go door-to-door collecting donations for your favorite charity. You would be wise to study the approach taken by social psychologist Stephen J. Sherman. He simply called a sample of Bloomington, Indiana residents as part of a survey he was taking and asked them to predict what they would say if asked to spend 3 hours collecting money for the American Cancer Society. Of course, not wanting to seem uncharitable to the survey taker or to themselves, many of these people said that they would volunteer. The consequence of this sly commitment procedure was a 700% increase in volunteers when, a few days later, a representative of the American Cancer Society did call and ask for neighborhood canvassers. Basically they went, hey, what would you say if you were asked? And they go, well, I guess if I was asked, I would do it because I don't want to be a dick. And then Later that week, they did get asked. So, joke's on them. Using the same strategy, but this time asking Columbus, Ohio residents to predict whether they would vote on Election Day, a team of researchers led by Anthony Greenwald were able to increase significantly the turnout in the U.S. presidential election among those called. Perhaps an even more crafty commitment technique has been developed recently by telephone solicitors for charity. Have you noticed that callers asking you to contribute to some cause or another these days seem to begin things by inquiring about your current health and well-being? Hello, Mrs. Target Person, they say. How are you feeling this evening, or how are you doing today? The caller's intent with this sort of introduction is not merely to seem friendly and caring, it is to get you to respond. Oops. As you normally do to such polite, superficial inquiries, with a polite, superficial comment of your own. Just fine, or real good, or I'm doing great, thanks. Once you have publicly stated that all is well, it becomes much easier for the solicitor to corner you into aiding those for whom all is not well. I'm glad to hear that, because I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to make a donation to help out the unfortunate victims of blah, 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 blah. The theory behind this tactic is that people who have just asserted that they are doing well or feeling fine, even as a routine part of a sociable exchange, will consequently find it awkward to appear stingy in the context of their own admittedly favored circumstances. If all this sounds a bit far-fetched, consider the findings of consumer research Daniel Howard, who put the theory to test. Dallas, Texas residents were called on the phone and asked if they would agree to allow a representative of the Hunger Relief Committee to come to their homes to sell them cookies. The proceeds from which would be used to supply meals for the needy. When tried alone, that request produced only 18% agreement. However, if the caller initially asked, "How are you feeling this evening?" and waited for a reply before proceeding to the standard approach, several noteworthy things happened. First, of the 120 individuals called, most gave the customary favorable reply. Good, fine, real well, whatever. Second, 32% of the people who got the "How are you feeling tonight?" question agreed to receive the cookie seller at their homes, nearly twice the success rate of the standard solicitation approach. Third, true to the consistency principle, almost everyone who agreed to such a visit did in fact make a cookie purchase when contacted at home. Wow. To make sure that this tactic doesn't generate its successes simply because a solicitor who uses it seems more concerned and courteous than one who doesn't use it, Howard conducted another study. This time, callers began either with the question, "How are you feeling this evening?" or with the statement, "I hope you're feeling well this evening," and then proceeded to the standard solicitation approach. Despite the fact that the caller started each type of interaction with a warm and friendly comment, the "How are you feeling" technique was by far superior to its rival, because it alone drew an exploitable public commitment from its targets. Note that the commitment was able to get twice as much compliance from those targets, even though at the time it occurred it must have seemed to them an altogether inconsequential reply to an altogether superficial question. Yet another fine example of social jujitsu at work. If I can make you commit to, basically, can I make you say something about yourself and then either build on it or subvert it? That is more powerful than if I'm just presenting my thing in a vacuum. That kind of makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Practically what that means is, how are you doing today? Are you doing good? Well, let me tell you about people who are not doing all that good. Make you feel guilt. I don't like that. I don't like preying on the negative emotions, but maybe I should. No, I shouldn't. I don't like it. But good to know. Good to know. The question of what makes a commitment effective has a number of answers. A variety of factors affect the ability of a commitment to constrain our future behavior. One large-scale program designed to produce compliance illustrates nicely how several of the factors work. The remarkable thing about this program is that it was systematically employing these factors decades ago, well before scientific research had identified them. During the Korean War, many captured American soldiers found themselves in prisoner of war camps run by the Chinese communists. It became clear early in the conflict that the Chinese treated captives quite differently than did their allies, the North Koreans, who favored savagery and harsh punishment to gain compliance. Specifically avoiding the appearance of brutality, the Red Chinese engaged in what they termed their lenient policy, which was in reality a concerted and sophisticated psychological assault on their captives. After the war, American psychologists questioned the returning prisoners intensively to determine what had occurred. The intensive psychological investigation took place in part because of the unsettling success of some aspects of the Chinese program. For example, the Chinese were very effective in getting Americans to inform on one another, in striking contrast to the behavior of American POWs in World War II. For this reason, among others, escape plans were quickly uncovered, and the escape attempts themselves almost always unsuccessful. When an escape did occur, a principal American investigator, Dr. Edgar Sheen, a principal American investigator of the Chinese indoctrination program in Korea, the Chinese usually recovered the man easily by offering a bag of rice to anyone turning him in. In fact, nearly all American prisoners in the Chinese camps are said to have collaborated with the enemy in one form or another. Okay. An examination of the Chinese prison camp program shows that its personnel relied heavily on commitment and consistency pressures to gain the desired compliance from prisoners. Of course, the first problem facing the Chinese was how to get any collaboration at all from the Americans. These were men who were trained to provide nothing but name, rank, and serial number. Short of physical brutalization, how could the captors hope to get such men to give military information, turn in fellow prisoners, or publicly denounce their country? The Chinese answer was elementary: start small and build. For instance, prisoners were frequently asked to make statements so mildly anti-American or pro-communist as to seem inconsequential, such as the United States is not perfect, in a communist country, unemployment is not a problem. But once these minor requests were complied with, the men found themselves pushed to submit to related yet more substantive requests. A man who had just agreed with his Chinese interrogator that the United States is not perfect might then be asked to indicate some of the ways in which he thought this was the case. Once he had explained himself, he might be asked to make a list of these problems with America and to sign his name to it. Later, he might be asked to read his list in a discussion group with other prisoners. After all, it's what you really believe, isn't it? Still later, he might be asked to write an essay expanding on his list and discussing these problems in greater detail. The Chinese might then use his name and his essay in an anti-American radio broadcast beamed not only to the entire camp, but to other POW camps in North Korea, as well as to American forces in South Korea. Suddenly, he would find himself a collaborator, having given aid to the enemy, and aware that he had written the essay without any strong threats or coercion. Many times, a man would change his image of himself to be consistent with the deed and with the new collaborator label, often resulting in even more extensive acts of collaboration. Thus, while only a few men were able to avoid collaboration altogether, the majority collaborated at one time or another by doing things which seemed to them trivial, but which the Chinese were able to turn to their own advantage. This was particularly effective in eliciting confessions, self-criticism, and information during interrogation. Many business organizations employ it regularly. For the salesperson, the strategy is to obtain a large purchase by starting with a small one. Almost any small sale will do, because the purpose of that small transaction is not profit. It is commitment. Further purchases, even much larger ones, are expected to flow naturally from the commitment. An article in the trade magazine American Salesman put it succinctly. The general idea is to pave the way for full-line distribution by starting with a small order. Look at it this way. When a person has signed an order for your merchandise, even though the profit is so small that it hardly compensates for the time and effort of making the call, he is no longer a prospect. He is a customer. A different volunteer worker had come to their doors. Wow. Basically, be very careful about agreeing to trivial requests. Such an agreement can not only increase our compliance with very similar, much larger requests. That's kind of fun. Let's break down the word request into request. Another adventure. Another adventure. Do you want this adventure? It can also make us more willing to perform a larger variety of larger favors that are only remotely connected to the little one we did earlier. It's the second general kind of influence concealed within small commitments that scares me. I'm rarely willing to sign a petition anymore, even for a position I support. Such an action has the potential to influence not only my future behavior, but also my self-image in ways I may not want. Okay, and the way to fight against this is basically to say, I don't like the label, but I like the cause. I'm not going to assign myself to the label, but I will engage in the action that I think is right for the cause. That's a very, very Naval Ravikant thing to say. Which anytime he's asked what his political stance is or how he feels about something, and it's housed in the context of a label, he's like, nah, I don't like the label. Because the moment I say, yes, I'm, a Democrat, I'm libertarian, I'm conservative, whatever, that holds with it some viewpoints that I may not actually totally agree with, but now have to defend because I am, TM, whatever. Notice that all of the foot-in-the-door experts seem to be excited about the same thing. You can use small commitments to manipulate a person's self-image. You can use them to turn citizens into public servants, prospects into customers, prisoners into collaborators. And once you've got a man's self-image where you want it, he should comply naturally with the whole range of your requests that are consistent with that view of himself. But that's not always the case. It is important to understand that the major intent of the Chinese was not simply to extract information from their prisoners, it was to indoctrinate them, to change their attitudes and perceptions of themselves, of their political system, of their country's role in the war, and of communism. And there's evidence that the program often worked alarmingly well. Many expressed antipathy toward the Chinese communists, but at the same time praised them for the fine job they have done in China. Others stated that, although communism won't work in America, I think it's a good thing for Asia. Wow. It appears that the real goal of the Chinese was to modify, at least for a time, the hearts and minds of their captives. If we measure their achievement in terms of defection, disloyalty, changed attitudes and beliefs, poor discipline, poor morale, poor esprit, what the hell is esprit? Is a French word meaning spirit, soul. In English, it can be used to esprit. Is that how you say it? Who knows? Dr. Siegel concluded that their efforts were highly successful. Because commitment tactics were so much a part of the effective Chinese assault on hearts and minds, it is quite informative to examine the specific features of the tactics they used. Wow, that's fascinating.